Hope by Katie Davis Majors. Daring to Hope, Finding God's Goodness in the Broken and the Beautiful. Chapter 6. We have one another. Our van pulls into the bumpy dirt space next to her crusted dirt house in the dusty, overcrowded slum, and there she stands, her smile like sunshine. It is hot and we are late, but her joy reminds me of where I find my joy. My two youngest see her and clap and chant, grinning, Miss Angelina, Miss Angelina. Her hug is warm and encouraging like a mother's, and I rest there a moment. Good morning, sweet friend, I say. The word friend rolls off my tongue and fills up my heart as my children pull on her skirt and crawl up into her arms, because friend is the word that captures who she is to all of us. She herds the girls into her house, no bigger than my kitchen, where she has tea and biscuits waiting for them. A snack so simple is, for her, a sacrifice. I am humbled. I have to run down the hill and start Bible study, but the girls don't bat an eye. They know they are safe here. They'll stay here with me, she says, chuckling. Enjoy your meeting. I thank her and whisper more thanks as I walk away down the hill. The full weight of it has hit me again. Here, in the most unlikely of places and circumstances, this woman has become my friend. Masis is a slum community of about 5,000 people, perched on a hillside on the outskirts of the bustling towns of Jinja. On the other side of the same hill is the town's landfill, where many of Masis's inhabitants find their livelihood by picking through the trash for scraps of metal to sell or food to eat. Those who do not engage in this work often turn to brewing alcohol or prostitution to support themselves and their families. Poverty, hunger, disease, and alcohol addiction are rampant here. There is beauty here too, though, as children laugh and dance, undeterred by the red dust swirling all around them, as women invite in their neighbors and look out for one another's children and share the little they have. After my years of ministry in the community, I've begun to think of it as a second home, with people like Angelina readily welcoming our family. Weeks later, Santina, another friend from this same small community, lets me put my hand on her shoulder and hold her child as she bends her head to weep. I had witnessed the birth of this child in this same tiny mud hut a couple years ago. There was no power here, so we had stood in the dim light of a candle waiting until her mother delivered her with one loud cry. Before I knew it, someone had placed the baby, still vermixed covered and slippery, in my lap as the other women went about helping Santina deliver the placenta and get cleaned up. I remember how the baby didn't really cry, more just squeaked, and her curious eyes had stared up at me in the dark house. I wrapped her in the nearest cloth I could find, and they named her Katie. Now today, Katie's father has gasped his last breath and closed his eyes in death as I held him in this very same lap that once held her wriggling new life. My head whirls as I consider how life and death tangle together, how we can rarely anticipate what a new day might bring, because there is little I can offer besides my presence and words of comfort. I mop Satina's tiny house. Later, I stand with their family in the rain as we cry. She has 7 children, 4 of whom were with us when their father died. Neighbors came to mourn with the family, and I feel the reassuring hands on my shoulders. An onlooker might think that I should be afraid of them, in the slum, in the dark middle of the night, in the rain. And maybe once I would have been, but I feel only comfort. This place has become a kind of sanctuary for me. I have found friends here. I have found fellowship here. Max stands with us too, having driven my van here so that I could sit in the back seat to hold and comfort Satina's little ones. Really, I think he just didn't want me to go alone. This is where he once lived before the accident, before he moved into our backyard. He doesn't let me stray far from his sight, my faithful guardian. He is protective of me, like a brother, and because he is concerned for my grief, he stays near. Dozens of faces reflect in the candlelight as we crowd into Satina's tiny home, and I marvel at how the same people who used to spit at me because of the color of my skin now joins hands with mine in the night. Thank you for crying for our pain, Lillian says, and words fail me. I remember the theologian Henry Nouwen, who wrote, "Compassion is not a bending toward the underprivileged from a privileged position. It is not a reaching out from on high to those who are less fortunate below. It is not a gesture of sympathy or pity for those who fail to make it in the upward pull. On the contrary, compassion means going directly to those people and places where suffering is most acute and building a home there. And so we said, this is what I want for our lives, mine and my children. Not to pity, but to suffer with these people, to walk alongside, to build our homes and community with them, to share in their burdens. I walked back up the muddy hill, my path lit dimly by the lantern of a nearby chapati stand. The village is crowded, people living in rickety shacks packed tightly into one small area. As I walk, I can't help but bump into people I know, and we embrace in the night. Even on these hardest days, I feel gratitude because I know this. These people, they are my friends. God has made it true that my joy is their joy, and their pain is my pain. In this unlikely place, He has made friendship, He has made relationship beautiful. Weeks later, a group of women from the same slum sit in a circle in my yard where we have gathered for Bible study. I serve tea and paint their toenails, and our laughter is real. We read the word and share prayer requests and praises. Not all of them believe yet, but they are starting to recognize His answers, to see that our prayers are real too. We have laughed at our days and cried at our sorrows. We have grieved death and rejoiced in new life. We have shared wild stories, and we have sat in the silence. And despite a million differences, we are really all just the same. One people, bonded by relationship. Though Namalel is part of the same group of women that gathers each Tuesday, we hardly understand each other. I speak English and Lugandan. Namal speaks Nakarimagon and Swahili. At Bible study, we use a translator, but today she has come to me for help because her baby is sick. With no one here who can really speak her language, I can't figure out how in the world she's going to tell me what is wrong. I try all kinds of crazy sign language. She just stares at me. I start making gagging noises as if I'm going to vomit. She nods her head enthusiastically. How many times, I ask, and even try to sign. She doesn't get it. I make the vomiting sound again. She shakes her head too. I make it twice. I make it 3 times. On the 4th, she nods her head earnestly again. We stare at each other, and then we fall to the floor in stitches. We both realize how ridiculous this is. The baby has a fever, so I hand her mother some medicine. She smiles, but when I stand up to go, she pulls me back onto the couch. Ekwi, she says, and I know that one. Pray. She wants me to pray for her baby. My heart dips because I know she has seen too much. Enough that a fever can send a mother's heart into fear for the life of her child. She lives where malnutrition and disease, lack of clean water, and unsanitary conditions put their children at risk every day. And just as any other mother would, she prays that her baby will be healthy and safe. Though communication is difficult between us, I have seen her eagerness for the word, her faith in trials, her joy in knowing Jesus. I curl myself back up next to her on the couch, and I thank Jesus for Namael and for her baby boy and for his love. She lays her little one on the couch asleep and stays for dinner. And as she sits on at my table and holds my hand as we bow our heads in prayer, again joy floods over me. Though we struggle through communication, barriers, and cultural differences, this woman is my friend. German pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote that our community with one another consists solely in what Christ has done for all of us. I have community with others and will continue to have it only through Jesus Christ. The more genuine and the deeper our community becomes, the more everything else between us will recede, and the more clearly and purely will Jesus Christ and His work become the one and only thing that is alive between us. We have one another only through Christ, but through Christ we do have one another completely and for all eternity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. What a beautiful promise. Status, culture, and language mean nothing in light of eternity. Race, age, and life experiences fade away. Namel's hand is in mine, and we bow to our Creator, and we break bread, and we laugh. Oh, we laugh. I hold her baby, and she holds mine, and we care about each other in a way that is real and deep. She sits on my couch and I sit on her dirt floor, and we exchange a few words that we can both understand in broken verb tenses. We love, and it is enough, and it will remain true for all eternity. Years ago, I began to pray over all those God brought into our home, a prayer I had often whispered to Him in regard to my daughters. Father, give me your eyes for them. Give me your eyes for this man, this woman, this child. Show me how you see each one. And without a doubt, though not always immediately, God answers a prayer such as this. Does He not long for us to receive one another, to love one another, to care for one another in the same way He cares for them? Does He not want us to see each other with new eyes and new hearts? And if compassion truly means to suffer with, then seeing our visitors with new eyes, being compassionate as He is compassionate, is not to pity, not to extend a hand of charity, but to be truly broken, to feel gut-wrenching pain when we see others suffer. In this way, maybe we are not called to alleviate suffering, as I had once imagined, as much as we are called to enter into the suffering of others and walk with them through it. We mourn with those who mourn. We weep with those who weep. We cry out with them for something better. My Western ideals of ministry and even missionary work would have, at one time, kept a separation between personal life and ministry, between home and work. But the longer our family abides with and among others who are more materially needy, but truly only just as desperate for Christ as we are, the more this separation seems not only unbiblical, but impossible. Life was certainly intended to be lived as ongoing ministry, not separate from ministry. Of course, the more I asked my Father God to give me His eyes to the people He brought into our life and home, the more He confirmed that He did not view anyone as the next ministry project or person to be evangelized, but as someone just as me who needed to be lavished with His undeserved, unmerited blessing, love, and favor. He was changing my vision again, giving me eyes to see that we most deeply experience His beauty when we walk with others in the darkness. We loved you so much that we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well, wrote Paul, Silas, and Timothy to the church at Thessalonica. This resonated deeply with my spirit as all different kinds of people made their home in and around our house. I wanted to live this every day of our lives. I wanted people to understand the gospel not because of our words, but because of the way we lived. This lifestyle of sharing and inviting others in to sit at our tables, rest on our couches, shower in our bathroom, and sleep in our beds goes against everything Western culture teaches about valuing personal space and privacy. I used to find it inconvenient, disruptive, even uncomfortable. But God continued to stretch me more and more and to teach me that this interruptible public lifestyle is the way He desires to live and to love. So we made a conscious decision as a family to welcome all to our table. I began to practice the art of being interrupted. As I chopped pounds and pounds of vegetables, I prayed that people would be not only filled physically at my table, but also filled spiritually in our home. As my heart cried out for this one to be true, God continued to give us opportunities to live in this way. Catherine was a young widow, mother of 5 children under the age of 10 and one young woman already grown. Most of her children were in Amazima's sponsorship program, receiving financial support for their education and medical care. Catherine had been fighting tuberculosis, a complication from HIV, for a while, but recently had gotten bad enough that she was rapidly losing weight and had very little energy. I got a call from one of our staff members who worried that Catherine might not be strong enough to take care of herself or her children, or to make the weekly trek from her village to the hospital in town where she was receiving her treatment. With the rooms in the backyard next to Max vacant, it seemed like a no-brainer to invite them to come stay. Catherine didn't need much, just some good food and a little extra care. I figured it would be a month, maybe 2, before she was strong and healthy enough to move out and care for her children on her own again. Our family welcomed theirs, and we became fast friends. Catherine was stubborn like me, and she wanted the best for her kids, even though she wasn't currently strong enough to make it happen. She had an opinion about everything and readily made it known, as the rest of us bustled about trying to ensure she got the very best care possible. She took her medicine and got some rest and ate nutritious food while her two oldest, Edith and Penny, came to be homeschooled with my kindergartners, and her little guys ran around the backyard. Friends turned into family as we adjusted to life with 6 more people. In a bit of a mess, this business of love. In a bit of a mess, this business, it is a bit of a mess, this business of love. And more people enter our lives. We are left with no choice but to enter theirs as well. Even more so. Over time, their pain becomes our pain and their joys become our joys. And this sharing of the gospel becomes a sharing of life. This at first glance seems so burdensome, so overwhelming, but somehow I have found it not to be any longer. Something about shouldering the burdens of another brings a lightness to our own affliction. We are in it together, and Christ is in it with us. The world would like to tell us otherwise. The world would teach us that pain is what ruins us. We are trained and conditioned to run from pain at all costs. Some would even argue that doing so is a primal instinct. Only the supernatural working of the Holy Spirit can override this fear of pain with a love that is greater. The world would teach us that once we are broken, we cannot be used, we cannot be strong, we cannot be happy. But this is not true. In the very greatest miracle of all time, our Father God resurrects his Son Jesus out of the dark tomb and conquers death. After the brutal beating and scourging and mocking that is a direct result of the ugliness of sin, Jesus whispers, "Father, forgive them." And he does. Out of the black of the tomb, new life emerges and new light shines forth. The Lamb, God uses all things, even pain, for his glory. This is what I saw him doing in our house, even before I could express my great desire for it. This is what I long for him to continue in our home today. As he does, he teaches me to view pain as a holy invitation to know him more so that I can share him more. Again and again, Jesus renews in me a desire to live this way, a desire to minister this way, a desire to mother this way. This desire to see all people as he sees them, to do life and death and joy and pain as one with our neighbor, has defined our family's entire lifestyle. Simple things like throwing a birthday party for someone who otherwise wouldn't have one, or making a meal to share with a patient in the local hospital, stopping to look into a tired mother's eyes and listen as she speaks of her struggles, or squeezing an extra space around the table for a hungry passerby. These things let others know that we are with them and for them, and that God is with them and for them too. Jesus set aside all my original plans and dreams for how I would change communities and lives in Uganda. This place and these people, he uses them to change and shape me. I share with them so little, and they share with me wisdom and joy and laughter. They let me sit with them and listen to their stories and their wisdom. They let me experience God's goodness and redemption in their painful circumstances. They embody genuine hospitality, even at the price of sacrifice, and they teach me true gratitude, even in the face of poverty. As I sit with them, as I learn from them, I know God's goodness in new ways. And that is the end of chapter 6. Chapter 7. A dry and weary land. The months passed and Catherine wasn't getting better. We continued to follow all the doctor's instructions, and they assured us that we were doing everything we could to address the symptoms of her advanced illness. Still, everyone agreed that her disease had progressed too far for her body to fight much longer. We discussed hospice care, but I didn't want to believe that we were out of options. She had 5 little children, all happy and healthy and leaping around my living room. Surely she had to get better, and they would move back to their home, restored to the happy, healthy family they once were. She was so young. Her children were so young, so in need of their mother. I remember sitting on the side of her bed like I did every morning to ensure that she was swallowing down the drugs meant to make her better, but that also made her nauseous. We spoke about the option of a possible surgery and all it would entail, as well as the idea of simply resigning to palliative care and doing the best we could with what we had left. I knew the prognosis. I had seen the doctor's most recent report and knew his speech before he gave it. that the antiretroviral drugs meant to save her life were tearing her stomach apart, and that 80 pounds was just too small for a woman of nearly 6 feet. It was possible, however, that with consistent treatment and a healthy diet, something might shift and her body might start responding. That was rare, but it was possible. So, there are your treatment options. I choked back a sob. How would I present a 30-year-old mother of five with the fact that we'd probably already done almost all we could? I will support you, whatever you choose. I turned so she wouldn't see me blink back the tears. Her answer was so simple. I would like to choose life. Her hands were steady, certain. My children are still so young. I would like to live. Of course, the tears burned hot in the back of my eyes, but I tried desperately not to let them fall. Not yet. It wasn't over yet. Yes, dear friend, I whispered. Yes, I want you to live. Intellectually, I knew that the chances of improving significantly were not great. But in my heart, I knew the God of the impossible. I knew the life giver. I couldn't help but hope, and I asked, begged it over and over again. Oh Lord, might she live? I remember the expectancy that he had been teaching me for years, to look at the broken places and expect that he would bring beauty, to look at bleak situations and expect that he would meet us there. The Lord will provide, I told myself, and I thought of the ram in the thicket. So I looked at illness that screamed of death, and I fully expected a miracle: healing, health, life. Sometimes his provision is so much different than what we have expected. I read the same I read that same night of a few men in Luke carrying their paralytic friend on a mat, desperate to lay him at the feet of Jesus. I thought of how cumbersome it must have been to hoist him up on that roof, how difficult it must have been to remove the tiles so that they could lower him through the ceiling in the middle of the night, right in the front of Jesus. And as I looked at Catherine, I thought maybe I knew a bit of the desperation they must have felt, the urgency to get him there. I thought too of the great hope they must have had that Jesus would heal their friend. They must have been so certain to go to such great lengths to get him there. My heart stirred with this kind of hope, a confidence, a certainty that God would answer us, that he would heal her. I read that because of the faith of the men, Jesus forgave their friend's sin and, for his glory alone, healed the man's legs as well, told him to get up and walk. This became my desperate, hopeful prayer for Catherine, that she would get up and walk in health and for the glory of God. I resolved, too, that I would choose life. I would choose it for her and for her children. I would choose it for me. I was determined that even when the temptation to despair was overwhelming, I would choose hope, expectantly, expectantly waiting on God to save not only Catherine's soul, but also her life. I would choose to believe for the victory found in Christ Jesus. I knew the God who could heal her. I desperately wanted him to heal her, and I believed that he would. Every night after I tucked my own children in bed, I would tuck in Catherine's children all around her. I handed her a glass of milk with her medicine, and we would watch her children's chests rise and fall with sleep as hers fought hard to breathe. I would sit at her bedside with her hands in mine and squeeze my eyes tight as I brought her before Jesus. In this way, I lowered her through the roof. I begged on behalf of her children, that she might know him more, and that for his glory alone he would heal her and call her up to get up and walk. We waited. Another Christmas came, marking the 5th month this family has spent with us. Because Catherine was growing weaker, we had moved her from the small house in our backyard to our living room, where I could provide more immediate assistance. Catherine slept on the couch, while her children piled on mattresses on the floor right under the glittering lights of our tree. Before the sun rose on Christmas morning, I squeezed between a pile of children and blankets in an attempt to find some quiet time by the dim light of the Christmas tree before the bustle of the day. I remember feeling distracted. Her children all had a cough, and they all breathed heavily and tossed and turned all around me. Catherine's chest heaved, and a small moan escaped her lips, and I worried. The rain pounded heavily on the tin roof, and the rain pounded loudly on the tin roof. Rain we needed after a longer than usual dry season. I thought briefly of how the rain might interrupt the day, all our expected guests tracking in sticky red mud, but I tried to be thankful for it nonetheless. I dreamed of Catherine's future. I dreamed of the futures of her children. I fleetingly wondered if there was a relative who could raise the brood of kids if she couldn't. I watched them sleep and heard my precious ones begin to stir in their bedrooms, and I wondered if I could do it all again today. Could I find the strength and grace to yet again care for the children and the sick and the broken and those who would come for dinner and just all these lives with all their needs? The house was all aglow with candles lit in the lights from the tree. I reminded myself of all of God's promises fulfilled in a baby, and I breathed it deep. Grace. In that moment, I felt so thankful that Jesus meets me in these squished places, in the stretched thin places, in the squeezed between the tree and the kids moments, in the desperate for quiet on the bathroom floor because everywhere else is in full moments. I read Luke 2. I thought of Bethlehem and how the inn had no room, and I thought of how baby Jesus' parents squeezed between the animals to place him in a feeding trough. God in the flesh, here in our pain and our mess. The shepherds gazed in wonder, but Mary held all this wonder in the silence of her heart. I bet she dreamed of his future. I bet it was dirty and noisy, but the sky was all a twinkle with the lights of that star, the heavens bursting with God's promises all fulfilled. Grace. I looked around and I knew again that this is what Jesus came for. The King of the universe, who created all things, even life itself, clothed in splendor, took off his royal robes, laid aside his crown, and squeezed all the fullness of God into the womb of a woman and then into swaddling clothes in a manger. The squished places and the stretched places, the moments that are too loud and too messy and too uncertain. This is what he came for. The heartaches and the doubts and the wounds that our sins carves deep. This is why he is here. All this life that was hanging in the balance in the dark of that morning. This is why we wait, why we celebrate. We light the candles and the tree and the house, and we cry with longing in our voices and our hearts, oh come, Emmanuel, come, Lord Jesus. And his hope surged up in me again for her and for her life. We waited. Christmas Day was full of joy. Looking back now, it was almost surprising to me just how much joy we felt, even in the midst of such difficult circumstances. It is as if God graciously allowed us to put the heart aside, and just celebrate. We all went to church on Christmas morning, and I remember feeling encouraged that Catherine was strong enough to walk from the van to her seat. Later, a turkey roasted in the oven while we temporarily put all the extra mattresses away and moved a second dining room table into our living room so that the guests would have more room to sit. Between the extra table and all the friends and family members who crowded into our small house, there was hardly room to move, but we didn't mind. Mashed potatoes and green beans and pumpkin pie filled up the tables, and children ran around while the grown-ups tried to have conversation above the noise. Catherine and her children had become an expected part of our family by now and joined right in the festivities. Long after the sun had set, we all gathered around one table and lit candles on a birthday cake. The kids sang happy birthday to Jesus and squealed with delight as they blew out the candles. I sat in awe of my girls, their arms around Catherine's children, eagerly making them a part of every family tradition. The genuine hospitality and unpretentious pleasure in including them truly blessed me. As guests left and children fell exhausted into bed, their eyes sparkling from the fullness of the day, I thanked God again for his goodness. The view of our sunflowers is one of my favorite things about looking out of our backyard while I stand in the kitchen. One of my many house guests planted them a few years ago with seeds she'd bought from her home in northern Uganda. They grew nearly 10 feet tall and they lift their faces to the sun, radiant. They are always blooming during the Christmas season here. To my dismay, the time we get to enjoy their blossoms always seems so brief in comparison to the time we wait for them to bloom. To replant them takes days of pulling the seeds from the dead heads and drying them in the sun before carefully pushing them back into the soft, rich dirt during the next rainy season. The more weeks of waiting before we finally see some tiny green shoots. We watch as the shoots become thick stalks and climb into the sky. Then my very favorite part, the weeks of wonder as small buds open into glorious and beautiful large flowers. If I can't find my girls before breakfast, they're in the garden measuring and marveling at the progress of our flowers. But all too soon, the regal flowers bend their heads and begin to die. Something in me becomes so sad as I watch the flowers lose their splendor. But the girls aren't fazed at all. The death and dying of the sunflower brings another exciting season. Harvest. The children rush to the backyard and let the garden's mud squish between their toes. I cringe a little as they hack the stalks down and pull off the flowers that are now bigger than their faces. Each flower yields hundreds of little seeds, and the girls grin big in the face of endless possibilities. I look at my now bare garden and feel lost, but these children of mine see great opportunity and wiggle with eager anticipation. Before they set piles aside to dry for the replanting, they grab handfuls to roast as snacks. I think we often look at our lives and see the barren places. It seems the garden is empty, plans dead and withered, dreams laid waste. It is easy to believe the lie that the good is over and gone, and maybe God is done working here, in me and in you. My children know better, and if I take the time to pause and remember, I know better too. That barren garden is ripe with opportunity and possibility. Those hundreds of seeds ready to fill bellies or grow and multiply again. Could we rejoice in the waiting? Could we believe that God, who brought Jesus out of the black of the tomb and green shoots out of the hard earth, will bring beauty out of our barren seasons? Could we know that beauty is in this whole process, the growing and the pruning and even in the waiting, not just part, not just the part with the beautiful flower? I watch my girls hard at work in the garden. This year they have extra friends to help. They gently instruct Katie's children in which stalks to cut down and where to set the flower heads to dry. Shells of sunflower seeds peek through their sheepish grins, and I hold my tongue as their muddy little feet pad over the just mopped floor, their arms filled with buckets of their prized harvest. Their smiles speak of a glory that far surpasses the beauty of the flowers. Later that day, our very living room speaks a splendor that could have been designed only by God Himself. I peek around the corner of a doorway to see 10-year-old Joyce cuddled on a couch reading a book to 5-year-old David. Sumanai and Edith and Penny play dolls and dress up together, and Sumanai relishes having 2 extra sisters for a time who are nearly 8, just her age. Sarah and Mary dote on little John, making sure all his needs are met. Later, Scovia, Ellie, and Tipita, who are a bit older, lead the whole gang in an exciting game, and they call me to watch as their friends put on a show. I watch my children reach out to those others and show deep concern for their feelings about their mother's illness and their displacement from their home. They have made it their personal mission to love these little ones for however long they're with us, opening their home and their hearts to say, "We are with you. We are here. We are for you." Without complaint, they squeeze into each other on the benches around our dinner table to make room for the 5 extra. The sunflower harvest is a simple but profound reminder. The girls don't grieve the empty garden because it gives great yield. The seeds provide snacks for weeks and plenty more for replanting. Next season, there will be even more. We will replant the seeds when the rains begin, and this time the harvest will be even greater because it will have started more seeds. The shoots will again spring up and reach for the sky. Again they will bloom beautiful, and again they will bow, bending low to the earth and waiting for my children to run wild-eyed in wonder to the harvest. And each time we replant and rain pours and the sun scorches and God brings beauty up out of the dust. Maybe the greatest joy isn't just in beholding the flowers, but in the process. I think over the past years in all the dark and hard places, God has protected us from the pounding rain and the scorching sun, like baby green shoots clinging to Him for dear life. I think even of the pain and loss in each of my girls' stories that has grown in them, such as capacity for kindness and generosity towards others, and the way He is using even parts of their stories that I do not know to minister to the extras we find around our table. As the evening wears on, I sit at the dining room table and look at them sprawled all over each other on the couches to watch a movie. Mac joins us for a movie too, and he grins at me, probably wondering why I sit where I do, watching the people instead of the film. And it is true here too. A wound all healed and covered with smooth new skin is a wonderful thing to behold, but not nearly as wonderful as the friendship that was built in the tending of that wound and the waiting for it to heal. Dreams die and seasons end, and terrible, unspeakable things happen that don't make sense, but God is not done with us yet. He uses the bending and the breaking and the dying to prepare the harvest, to prepare more for us. We reach high to the sun, and He comes down and pulls us closer. We lift our heads to Him in awe, and we know that there might be hard around the corner, but that we could look expectantly even to the bowing and the breaking, even the death of all we had planned, because we know in him there will always be more. He sees the seeds that come from with all the endings and is faithful to use them to turn them into beauty. I clung to the truth that there was beauty here and now in the waiting, not just in the outcome. I was anticipating for Catherine, for her children, for our family. As I watched the sunflowers out the window, their faces lifted to the sun, I thought of Abraham, waiting all those years for his promised son. Again and again, God reminded me to have eyes like my children, eager and expectant. We waited, but Catherine didn't get any better. On New Year's Eve, friends and neighbors gathered around a bonfire in our backyard to watch fireworks. We roasted our hot dogs and marshmallows, part of my ongoing efforts to preserve a sense of normalcy for my children in this unconventional life I had chosen for us. Grasping Catherine's hand and holding her youngest son in my lap on the couch, I listened through the open window as kids oohed and ahed outside. At just 4 years old, John was her buddy and wasn't willing to leave her side to join the fun outside. The next morning, she was noticeably worse and in a lot of pain. We took her to the hospital to explain to the doctor we'd been working closely with her that her agony was only increasing. I wondered if I would have done anything differently that day if I had known she wouldn't come back to our living room again. I wondered if I would have prepared my heart or her children or mine a little better. But I was believing for healing, waiting on it, expectant. The doctor did a scan and gave us more news we didn't want to hear. Catherine's digestive tract had completely stopped moving, causing an obstruction, which was the source of her severe pain. Apart from surgery, there was nothing we could do, and Catherine was still too thin and weak to undergo anesthesia. I drove to the store to get some things for supper and then went home and, as if it were any ordinary night, rolled out pizza dough and asked the girls to help me grate cheese. Once we had all eaten, I drove my kids and hers to the hospital, where we sat and waited for more information from the doctors on what we could possibly do next. Catherine spent 6 long, agonizing nights in the hospital. I went home and back a lot as the hospital was close by. Several friends took shifts with our children in hospital and household responsibilities. I sat with her in the hospital late into the night, sometimes into the early morning. Close friends came and sat with me and helped me sift through all that the doctors were saying as if there were any other option. I look back and marvel at how many people stepped in and loved us so that I could just keep loving her. In hindsight, I see it. They were God's provision. My ram in the thicket. At the time, all I could see was that Catherine needed to be loved. Whether she was healed or not, we would make sure that in this time she was well loved. She couldn't eat, and a fluid IV dripped into her arm seemed to be the only thing sustaining her life. Slowly, she lost the ability to speak and only groaned, her periods of consciousness growing less and less frequent. I read again and again, out loud to her, but also to myself, "Oh God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water." She was thirsty, her lips parched and cracking, and I was thirsty to see God here. We cried out to him, but my desperate pleading and earnest seeking wouldn't yield the outcome I was looking for. Not this time. On the evening of our 6th day at the hospital, with a loud cry of agony, Catherine died. And that is the end of chapter 7. Daring to hope. Finding God's goodness in the beautiful and the broken.